Welcome back to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Today is episode 3 of Your Stories Heard, a series where your stories of the strange, eerie, and unexplained take center stage. Before we start, I need to say this up front. What you are about to hear isn't a legend, and it isn't a campfire story passed down for fun. This is a first-person account told by someone who didn't go looking for answers and didn't leave with any. Tonight's story takes place in Land Between the Lakes, a place a lot of people think of as peaceful. Campgrounds, trails, water on all sides. The kind of place families vacation and then quietly leave before dark. If you've spent any time listening to encounter stories, you've probably heard the name before. There's a reason it comes up again and again. People report the same things, the same sounds, the same feeling of being watched, the same overwhelming certainty that whatever is out there is not confused and not afraid of you. This account was shared with the understanding that names, dates, and identifying details would be left out. All stories will remain anonymous. What matters isn't who this happened to. What matters is what they saw and how close it came. As you listen, pay attention to the small details, the pauses, the moments where the storyteller hesitates or tries to laugh something off. That's usually where the truth sits. Fear doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles in quietly, and then it stays. So if you're somewhere remote right now, if you're driving through trees or listening with the lights off, you might want to reconsider that. This is a true encounter with something people come to call the Dog Man. And once you hear it, you'll understand why some places don't want to be explored. Let's begin. I don't tell this story, not because I like mystery, and not because I want people to wonder. I don't tell it because it still messes with me. Even now, saying it out loud, there's this part of me that wants to stop. Like once it's spoken, it becomes real again. Like it hears me remembering. For a long time, I convinced myself that keeping quiet meant it couldn't follow me. I know how that sounds. I know. But after something like this, logic stops being the thing you trust first. I didn't come out of this with scars you can see. I went home. I went back to work. I did all the things you're supposed to do when nothing officially happened. But I didn't sleep right for a long time. When I did sleep, I woke up already tense, like my body never fully shut down. I stopped going into the woods. I didn't swear them off or make a big deal about it. I just stopped going. If a trailhead came up on a drive, I'd find a reason to keep moving. If someone suggested camping, I'd change the subject. And my dog, this is the part that still gets me. My dog started acting strange afterward. He'd stare at the tree line in our backyard and growl low in his throat. Not at anything I could see. Sometimes he wouldn't come when I called him, like he was listening to something else. Animals don't do that for no reason. They just don't. I understand how unbelievable this sounds. I've replayed it myself 1,000 times, trying to break it down into something smaller, something explainable. Stress, fear, a misidentified animal, a trick of the light even. If I hadn't been there, I wouldn't believe me either. But the problem is, what I saw wasn't panicked. It wasn't confused. It didn't stumble into me by accident or react out of fear. What I saw knew exactly where I was. It knew when I stopped moving. It knew when I tried to be quiet. And it adjusted. That's the part that never leaves me. Not the way it looked, though that was bad enough, but the certainty, the awareness, the understanding that I wasn't dealing with an animal acting on instinct. I was being watched, measured, and whatever it was, it had already decided I belonged there, whether I wanted to or not. That's why I don't talk about this. But I think it's time I did. I didn't go out there looking for anything strange. That's important to say, because I think people assume you have to be chasing stories like this. Like you have to invite them somehow. I didn't. I was just trying to get away for a few days. No schedules, no noise, no people. I'd been to the land between the lakes before. Not deep, not far in, just enough to know it felt remote without ever feeling dangerous. Waters on both sides, woods stretching forever. The kind of place where you tell yourself, this is what quiet is supposed to sound like. The plan was simple. A couple nights. Camp set back from the main areas. Some fishing during the day. No signal. No internet. Just unplugging. That was the appeal. That was the whole point. The drive-in was uneventful. Long roads, trees blurring together, the occasional sign reminding you how far you were from anything resembling help. My phone lost signal way earlier than I expected, but it didn't bother me. When I finally parked and stepped out, the first thing I noticed was how still it was. Not peaceful, just still. No distant traffic, no voices. Even the water nearby barely made a sound. The trees went on forever. Thin trunks packed tightly together, all looking the same after a while. You could sit in a straight line and lose your sense of direction faster than you'd think. I'd set up camp like I always did. Nothing fancy. Muscle memory mostly. I remember thinking how normal everything felt. That's the part that messes with me now. How calm I was. How safe I assumed I was. It wasn't until later that the quiet started to feel off. At first, it was small things. The kind of details you'd normally brush past without a second thought. I realized I hadn't heard birds in a while. No calls, no wings, nothing hopping through the brush. Just absence. Then the wind stopped. Not gradually. Not easing down like it usually does. It just cut out, all at once, like someone closed a door. The air felt heavy after that. Thick. Like the woods were holding their breath. I remember standing there, listening harder than I needed to, telling myself I was overthinking it. Places like that get quiet sometimes. Animals move on, weather shifts. There's always an explanation. That's when I noticed the trees. Not all of them, just a few at first. Scratches along the bark, high up, higher than they should have been. Long, vertical marks, deep enough that the wood underneath showed through. I remember running my fingers over one and thinking how fresh it looked. I told myself it was a bear, or maybe somebody messing around. People do stupid things in the woods. I didn't linger on it. I wish I had. There was a smell, too, now that I think back on it. Faint, but there. Not like decay exactly. More like wet fur mixed with something metallic. Coppery. It came and went, like it was drifting instead of coming from one place. I didn't connect any of it. That's the truth. I saw all the pieces, but I didn't put them together. I was relaxed, comfortable, doing what I had come out there to do. Looking back, that was the trap. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just enough wrongness to be noticed and ignored. By the time I realized the woods weren't empty anymore, I was already too far in to leave without drawing attention. And something out there had already noticed me. I can't tell you the exact moment it started. That's a part of this that makes it hard to explain. There wasn't a sound at first. No movement I could point to. Not a shift. Not like the air around me had changed shape. I remember standing there and feeling this pressure settle in. Not on my skin, but somewhere deeper. The kind of awareness you get when someone's behind you and you know it before you turn around. I told myself I was just keyed up. Too much quiet will do that to you. When everything goes still, your brain fills in the gaps. But this was different. This wasn't imagination. It felt focused, directed. I started noticing how carefully I was moving, how every sound I made suddenly felt too loud. I'd pause without meaning to, just to listen. And every time I did, that pressure got heavier, like something was waiting to see what I'd do next. That's when I heard it. Not close, but not far either. Somewhere in that middle distance, where depth gets hard to judge in the trees. A slow, steady sound. Heavy, measured. Every step placed with intent. At first, I thought it was a deer. Then I realized the rhythm was wrong. Too even. Too controlled. And there were 2 points of contact. Not 4. 2. Bipedal movement. I stopped moving. So did it. That's the moment I can't make sense of, no matter how many times I replay it. Animals don't do that. Not like that. They keep going. They crash away. They don't freeze just because you did. After a few seconds, maybe longer, time does weird things there. It moved again, but not away. It started to circle. I could hear it shifting through the brush, staying just out of sight, never stepping on anything loud enough to give itself away. Sometimes it sounded closer, sometimes further, like it was testing angles, testing me. Then there was the breathing. Low, slow, not labored, not panicked, but controlled. It rose and fell in a way that made my skin crawl, because it didn't sound like something trying to hide. It sounded like something making sure I could hear it. I started listing explanations in my head. Coyotes, foxes, a big bobcat, anything that fit in the world I understood. But none of them stood upright. None of them matched my movements. And none of them made me feel the way this did, like I was being sized up, not chased. I remember turning slowly, scanning the tree line, trying not to look scared. That sounds ridiculous now, but in the moment, it felt important. Like fear itself might be what it was waiting for. The circling continued, not random, but intentional, always keeping the same distance, always staying just beyond where I could see clearly. Then I made the mistake of stepping back. The footsteps stopped instantly. No delay, no confusion, just silence. That's when the dread really set in. Because whatever was out there wasn't reacting. It was mirroring, anticipating. It wasn't moving through the woods. It was moving with me. I realized then that I wasn't alone in the way people usually mean. I was being followed. Not hunted yet, but observed. And the thing watching me was patient enough to wait. That's when I understood something else too. This wasn't the first time it had done this. And it wasn't improvising. I don't know how long it had been circling me when it made the sound. Time had started to stretch by then. Seconds felt longer than they should have. Every small noise felt magnified. The shift of my weight, the brush of my fabric, my own breathing sounding too loud in my ears. And then it let itself be heard. At first, I didn't even recognize it as a howl. My brain reached for that word afterward, because it was the closest thing I had. But that's not what it was. Not really. It started low. So low, I felt it more than I heard it. A vibration that pressed into my chest and made my stomach drop. It rose slowly, deliberately, not like an animal calling out, but like something choosing the sound it wanted to make. There was no panic in it, no wildness. The cadence was wrong, too steady, too measured. Wolves don't sing like that. Coyotes don't either. This wasn't a call thrown out into the night, hoping for an answer. This was aimed. The sound climbed and dipped in a way that made my skin prickle. It lingered longer than it should have, then cut off too cleanly. Not fading, not trailing away, just stopped, like someone closing their mouth. My chest tightened so fast it caught me off guard. I had to force myself to breathe, and even then it felt shallow, like my body didn't want to draw attention to itself. My hands started shaking, not violently, just enough that I noticed I couldn't keep them still. I remember feeling nauseous, that hot, hollow feeling right under your ribs, like your body is deciding whether it needs to empty itself to survive something. And then there was the silence. Not a normal silence. Not the kind you notice and move past. This was absolute. No insects, No rustling, no distant water. Even the wind was gone again, like the world itself had leaned back to listen. I stood there, frozen, listening so hard it hurt. That's when it hit me, not as a thought, but as a certainty. Whatever made that sound wanted a response. It wasn't announcing itself. It wasn't warning me off. It was waiting to see what I would do. I realized then that the circling wasn't random. The pacing, the stopping when I stopped, the breathing close enough to hear but far enough to hide. This was communication. And the worst part? Somewhere deep down, past the fear and the disbelief, I knew I'd pass some kind of test just by not running, by not screaming, but by staying still. That hollow wasn't meant for the woods. It was meant for me. And as the silence stretched on, heavier with every heartbeat, I understood something I hadn't let myself think until then. I wasn't dealing with something driven by instinct. I was dealing with something that expected an answer and was patient enough to wait for it. I didn't see it all at once. That's another thing people expect. Some sudden reveal, some clear moment where everything snaps into focus. That's not how it happened. It came in pieces, just enough at a time for my brain to keep fighting it. I noticed movement first. Not close, out near the tree line, where the line dropped off and everything blended together. At first, it was just a shape, darker than the trees behind it, but not solid enough to grab onto. I remember squinting, leaning forward slightly, trying to decide if it was even real or just shadows stacking the wrong way. Then it shifted. And that's when I realized how tall it was. Too tall. Not big animal tall, wrong tall. The kind of height that doesn't belong between trees like that. It rose slowly, unfolding instead of standing, like it had been crouched without me realizing it. For a second, it stood upright, fully upright. My brain immediately rejected that. I told myself I was standing on a rise, a stump, a trick of perspective, anything that kept the world normal for another few seconds. Then it dropped. Not clumsily, not the way a person loses balance. It lowered itself smoothly, effortlessly, like gravity worked differently for it. Like it was just choosing another way to exist in that space. That's when I saw the eyes. They caught what little light there was and held it. Not flashing, not darting, just fixed. And they were too high. Even when it was lower to the ground, the eyes stayed above where they should have been. Higher than a wolf, higher than a bear, higher than any animal I'd ever seen out there. I remember whispering to myself, actually whispering, "You're not seeing this right." I told myself my depth perception was off, that the dark was compressing distance, that fear was stretching things out. I blinked hard, looked away, and looked back. It was still there, still watching. That was the moment denial started to crack. Not shatter, crack. Like a fracture spreading quietly under the pressure. Because shadows don't watch you. And they don't adjust when you shift your weight. I realized then that it wasn't trying to hide anymore. It had let me see it, just enough. And standing there, staring into something I still didn't have a name for, I understood the worst part of it all. This wasn't the first time it had shown itself to someone like this. And whatever it was, it knew exactly how much to reveal without sending me running blind into the woods. It stopped hiding. There wasn't a sudden crash through the brush or some dramatic entrance. It just stepped forward, out of the trees, into a space where I could finally see it clearly. And once I did, there was no room left to pretend. It stood there in the open, far enough away that it didn't have to rush, close enough that distance didn't matter anymore. The first thing that hit me was the height. 7 feet at least, maybe more. It's hard to judge when your brain is struggling to accept what it's looking at. But I know this. It was taller than any person I'd ever stood near, and it carried the height wrong. Like it wasn't built for human posture, but could use it when it wanted to. Its legs bent the opposite way than mine do. Up on the toes, joints raised, muscles tight and coiled. The stance alone told me it could move faster than I ever could. Faster than anything I knew how to react to. Then I saw the arms. They were too long. That's the only way to put it. Hanging past where they should have ended, shoulders sloped forward in a way that made its chest look broad and powerful. Not bulky, but efficient. Like nothing on it was wasted. And then there was the face. Canine. No question about it. A muzzle, ears set high, teeth just visible behind lips that didn't quite rest the way an animal's should. But the eyes ruined every explanation I had left. They didn't dart. They didn't fixate on movement. They tracked me. Not where I was, but what I was thinking about doing. I realized when I shifted my weight, just slightly, without taking a step, the eyes moved before I did. Like it already knew which way I was leaning. Like it was anticipating choice, not action. That's when it tilted its head. Slowly and intentionally. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't curiosity, the way people talk about animals being curious. It was evaluation. Like it was checking something against an internal list. Then its mouth moved. Not fully opening, just enough. A slow curl of the lip. Not a snarl, not a threat display. Something closer to a smile. And I hate saying that, but that's what it felt like. A controlled reveal. Teeth catching the light for just a second. My stomach dropped. I could hear its breathing then. Deep, steady breaths that sounded too calm for the situation. Each one felt like it pressed against my chest. Like the air itself was being displaced on purpose. And underneath that breathing, there was a sound. Low. Almost too low to hear. More vibration than noise. It resonated through me instead of reaching my ears first. I felt it in my ribs, in my teeth. That's when the last illusion broke. I wasn't being warned. I wasn't being chased. I was being considered. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but something deeper locked me in place. Because I knew, absolutely knew, that running would flip a switch I didn't want flipped. Standing there, looking at something that shouldn't exist, but clearly did, I understood my position in a way I never had before. It knew I was prey. Not in a hungry way. Not yet. In the way something knows it could end you and doesn't need to prove it. That knowledge settled over me heavier than fear. Heavier than panic. It was certainty. And once you felt that, once you really understand where you stand in the hierarchy of whatever is in front of you, you don't forget. You don't ever forget it. It didn't rush me. That's the part that makes my skin crawl when I think about it. If it had charged, if it had exploded into motion, I could have understood that. Fear would have taken over. Instinct. Fight or flight. Something simple. But it didn't do that. It stepped back instead. Not retreating, but repositioning. Like it was resetting the board. I stayed where I was, barely breathing, watching it shift its weight, watching the muscles under its fur move like they were coiled too tight. Then it began to pace, slow, side to side, never taking its eyes off me. I took a step back. It angled slightly to the left, not following, but blocking. That's when I realized this wasn't about speed. It didn't need to be faster than me. It just needed to be where I wasn't allowed to go. I tried another direction. Small, careful steps, testing the space. The moment I committed, there was movement to my right. Branches snapping in a clean pattern. Not crashing, not random. Like footsteps placed where they'd be heard. I froze. The pacing stopped again. The woods felt smaller then, like the space around me had tightened. I could hear sounds from multiple directions now. Something shifting behind me, something heavier off to my left. Each sound spaced out, measured, like they were communicating without needing to be seen. That's when it hit me. I wasn't alone with it. The thought landed heavy, slow, and undeniable. The movements didn't overlap. They didn't stumble into each other. They answered one another. One sound would stop, another would start, like a handoff. I turned just enough to check behind me and immediately regretted it. The footsteps echoed my movement. Not delayed, not sloppy, perfectly timed. Close enough that I could hear the weight transfer. Close enough that my spine went cold. I understood then that the space it had left open, the path that almost looked clear, wasn't an escape. It was a suggestion. Every direction I considered felt anticipated. Every pause I took was matched. It let me believe I had choices while quietly removing them one by one. That's the kind of fear that doesn't spike. It settles. It presses down on you until your thoughts slow and your body feels too heavy to trust. I realized I hadn't heard the breathing anymore. Not because it was gone, but because it was everywhere, surrounding me, layered into the sounds of the woods, blending in so completely that I couldn't tell where one presence ended and another began. I didn't run. I don't know if that was instinct or luck or something else entirely. I just knew that if I broke into panic, if I gave them what they were waiting for, this would end fast and not in my favor. So I moved when I was allowed to, stopped when I felt the space tighten, listened when the woods told me to. That was the worst part. Realizing the forest itself felt like it was participating. And somewhere in all of that careful movement, all of that quiet control, I understood something that made my throat go dry. This wasn't a chase meant to end quickly. This was practice. It came closer, not rushing, not lunging, just closing the distance until I could feel it in ways that didn't show up on cameras or sketches. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Wet fur, yes, but something else underneath. Metallic and sharp, like the air itself had a taste to it. The heat was the next thing, radiating in waves, pressing against the cold night air, heavier than anything I've ever felt. And then the breath. I could hear it now, low, steady, almost deliberate. Each exhale warm against my skin, but not hitting like a gust. More like the air itself was being moved by something alive, watching, calculating. I lifted my eyes slowly. It didn't flinch. We locked eyes, and I don't mean glanced, I mean locked. Eyes that weren't just reflecting light, but absorbing it. Eyes that assessed, that measured, that read intention. I swear it lasted longer than it should have. My heart hammered, but the world outside that gaze slowed. Every thought I tried to hide was there. Every shift of weight, every small tremble. I thought it might strike. Every instinct screamed it would, but it didn't. And that's when I realized why. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't mindless aggression. It was curiosity, assessment, something like a territorial warning, maybe both. And then, in a way that still haunts me, I realized there was something else out there, watching it. Something patient, something older, waiting. I never saw it, never heard it, but the way it hesitated, the way it held me in that gaze, I knew. It made a choice, and it let me go. Not because I deserved it, not because it had to, because it decided I live for now. And that certainty, that deliberate decision, pressed into me harder than fear ever had. I stumbled backward without meaning to, my legs weak, my hands shaking. Every step I took felt surreal, like the world had tilted slightly and I had no leverage. And even as I moved away, I kept looking back, half expecting it to follow with speed I couldn't match. It didn't. But the gaze lingered, even when I couldn't see it anymore. And that's the part that stays with me the most. Not the height, not the teeth, not even the sound of its low, vibrating breath. It was the certainty, that it could have ended me, and it chose not to. I've never forgotten that choice. I made it to my truck. I don't know how long it took me to get there. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the forest was pressing against me, holding me back just enough to slow me down. My hands were shaking, hard enough that I dropped the keys twice before I could get the ignition to work. The moment the engine started, I thought I'd be safe, that the motion, the distance, the metal between me and the woods would mean it's over. It wasn't. There was a sound. Soft, a shuffle at first, then heavier. Footsteps, stopping just as I moved, pausing, measuring, waiting. I looked through the windshield. The road was empty. Nothing obvious, but the feeling, the certainty that it was still out there, didn't leave. I drove slowly at first, because every shadow seemed to move with me. Every tree, every bend in the road, every patch of darkness felt alive. And then I saw it. Or them. Movement at the edge of the tree line, pacing along with me. Not running, not chasing, just matching my speed. Watching. Still deliberate, still patient. My stomach twisted. Every instinct I had screamed to floor it, but I didn't. Somehow, I knew speed wouldn't save me. It hadn't before, and maybe it never would. I risked a look back, the kind that makes your chest tighten because you know exactly what you'll see if you do. Eyes, reflecting, catching the light from my headlights. Dozens of them. Maybe one. I don't know. But they held the same awareness I'd felt before. That same certainty. Then slowly, they vanished. Or maybe they just melted into the darkness. I couldn't really tell which. The thing is, even miles down the road, even with the trees giving way to open fields, the memory of that gaze fouled me. The forest behind me seemed to hum with it. Not alive, not gone, just waiting. And that's when I realized that escape doesn't always mean safe. Not in this world, not in this place. Because once it knows you, once it decides you exist, distance, walls, engines, lights, none of it really matters. You leave, but part of you, part of me, never does. I thought getting out of those woods would mean it was over. I was wrong. The first nights back were rough. I woke constantly, heart hammering, sweat soaking my shirt, even when the air was cold. Dreams, nightmares really, that were too detailed to be imagined. Footsteps circling me in the dark, shadows that moved with purpose, whispers I couldn't place. And my dog. He didn't help. He'd freeze mid-step, stare into corners of the room like something was there that I couldn't see, growl at empty space, bark once, low, sharp, then retreat to the far corner. Things I hadn't seen him do in years. It didn't matter where I went. I always felt watched. For weeks. When I went outside, the backyard, the street, even my bedroom window, that same pressure, the same certainty, the way the air felt, I just know it followed me. I started researching. I needed to make sense of it. Needed to find something, anything, that explained why a shape in the trees had such intent. And that's when I found it. The other encounters. People in land between the lakes reported the same sounds, the same pacing, the same eyes, the same figure. Account stretching back years. Different people, different dates, same certainty. Some of the reports went further. People had vanished. Hikes that started normally, friends and family never seeing them again. Search parties coming up empty. Trails swallowed by time and trees. And that was the worst realization. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This wasn't a one-off. This thing, whatever it was, had a pattern, territory, targets, and I crossed its path. Survived by choice, yes, but alive only because it wanted me to be. I try to live normally. I go about my days, but the feeling lingers. That quiet awareness at the edge of vision. That something is always observing, just beyond perception. Waiting. Patient. And I don't tell this story lightly. I don't tell it to scare, though it does. I tell it because people need to know, even just a little, that some places are not safe. That the forest, the woods, even somewhere that feels familiar, can hide things older and smarter than we are. People have gone missing there. I know because I almost became one of them. Time has passed since that night. Years even. And you'd think that it would make it easier to talk about. But it doesn't. Fear doesn't work like time. Fear lingers. It settles into your body, into the quiet spaces of your mind. It sits there when the lights are off, when the doors are locked, when the wind moves a certain way. I'm telling the story now, not to prove anything, not to convince anyone of what I saw, not to collect disbelief or awe. I don't need you to believe me. I'm telling it because maybe someone listening will remember it differently than I did. Maybe they'll hear it and understand that there are places where caution isn't paranoia. That some things, some presences, are real, even if proof doesn't exist. If you hear something standing where it shouldn't, don't investigate. Walk away. Leave it alone. Let it decide whether you live or die. I don't speak these words lightly. I don't look for an audience to gasp or lean in. I say them because the silence that follows is worth more than the explanation I could give. So I'll leave it there. The forest doesn't announce itself. The presence doesn't call. In the quiet, That quiet is heavier than anything you'll hear. Let it sit. Let it linger. And remember, some things you don't need to see to know they exist. Before we go, I want to thank the person who shared their story with me. It takes a lot of courage to relive something like that, and I'm honored you trusted me to tell your story. If you have your own encounter, something strange, unexplained, or just downright eerie, we'd love to hear it. You can submit your stories to hexes, haunts, and howls at gmail.com. Again, that's hexes, haunts, and howls, all one word, at gmail.com. And remember, all submissions remain completely anonymous. Your experience could be featured on another episode of Your Stories Heard, giving others a glimpse into the unknown without ever revealing your identity. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.